I still wake up sweating when I hear the sound of a ceiling fan on high speed. It's that rhythmic chopping noise, cutting through the air, that takes me right back to the humidity of the Pacific, strapped into the cockpit of a Douglas SBD Dauntless. My name is Frank Sullivan. I'm 89 years old now, and for most of my life, I've been a quiet man. I worked in hardware, paid my taxes, raised 3 kids, and mowed my lawn on Sundays. To my neighbors, I was just Frank. But in 1945, I was a 22-year-old kid with the power of God at his fingertips and a death wish I couldn't quite explain. I've never told this story in full. Not to my wife, may she rest in peace, and certainly not to my children. They look at these hands, spotted with age, trembling a bit when I hold a coffee cup, and they don't see the hands that gripped a flight stick with white-knuckled terror while the jungle rushed up to meet me at 300 miles an hour. They don't know about the day I decided that the rules didn't apply anymore, because good men were dying in the mud and I was the only thing standing between them and a massacre. I flew that plane lower than any manual said was possible. I flew it until I could see the terror in the eyes of the enemy and the desperation in the eyes of our own boys. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened and why the silence after the engine cuts off is the loudest sound I've ever heard. It was January 1945. We were supporting the invasion of Luzon in the Philippines. By that point in the war, the SBD Dauntless was considered an old bird. The Navy had largely moved on to the chaotic power of the Helldiver, but the Marines and some Army outfits stuck with the Dauntless because she was stable. She was a dive bomber that could put a 500-pound bomb into a pickle barrel from a mile up, if you had the nerve to hold the dive long enough. We called her slow but deadly. She didn't have the speed of the Mustangs or the Corsairs, but she could take a beating and bring you home. I loved that plane. It smelled of oil, hydraulic fluid, and old sweat. It was a smell that stuck to your skin, soaked into your flight suit, and followed you into your dreams. On this particular morning, the weather was typical for the tropics. Heavy, suffocating heat even before the sun had fully crested the horizon. The briefing was short and messy. We had a battalion of infantry pinned down in a valley that the map said should have been clear. Intelligence had screwed up, plain and simple. They walked right into a horseshoe ambush. Japanese artillery was dug into the hillsides, hidden by dense canopy and caves, and they were hammering our boys into the dirt. The call for close air support came in screaming over the radio. You could hear the panic in the forward air controller's voice. His call sign was Badger, and I'll never forget the way his voice cracked. He wasn't using code anymore. He was just begging. "We are taking effective fire from 3 sides. We cannot move. We are taking heavy casualties. Send everything. Send it now." I walked out to my plane, my boots kicking up the dust of the airstrip. My rear gunner, a kid from Philly named Miller, was already on the wing, checking the twin .30 calibers. Miller was 19, with a face full of acne and a spirit that hadn't been broken yet. He looked at me, gave a thumbs up, but I could see the tightness around his eyes. We knew this wasn't a milk run. We weren't bombing shipping lanes or empty airfields. We were going into the meat grinder. I climbed into the cockpit, buckled the harness, and felt that familiar claustrophobia set in. You become part of the machine. The metal presses against you. The engine coughs, sputters, and then roars to life. A radial beast that shakes your fillings loose. We taxied out, 4 of us in the flight, laden with bombs and a full load of ammunition. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Taking off in a fully loaded SBD is a labor of physics. You feel the weight of the bomb underneath the belly, dragging you down. We clawed for altitude, circling the airfield once before heading inland toward the coordinates Badger had screamed into the radio. The landscape below was a deceptive, lush green, beautiful if you didn't know what was hiding under those leaves. As we approached the target area, the radio crackled to life again. It was chaos. You could hear the thump of mortars in the background of the transmission. "Badger to Angel flight. They're walking the mortars in on us. We need suppression on the North Ridge, immediately." I looked down. From 4,000 feet, it looked like a mess of smoke and fire. The jungle was burning in patches. I could see the tracers, faint lines of light zipping back and forth. The Japanese positions were well concealed. Usually you look for the muzzle flashes, but the canopy was thick. "Angel leader, this is Angel 2, I said into my mask. "I can't see the target. It's too thick." My flight leader, a captain named Henderson, came back. "Drop on the smoke coordinates. Do your best." We peeled off one by one. The dive in a Dauntless is a violent thing. You pull the lever to open the dive brakes, these perforated flaps on the trailing edge of the wings that keep you from accelerating past the speed of sound and tearing the wings off. The plane shudders as the brakes catch the wind. You roll over, upside down, and then pull the nose through until you're staring straight down at the earth. Gravity pushes you against the straps. Your stomach floats up into your throat. The world narrows down to the telescopic sight in front of you. I did 2 runs. Standard procedure. Drop from 2,000 feet, pull out at 1,500. I dropped my wing bombs on the estimated positions. Explosions blossomed in the green, throwing up dirt and trees. But as I pulled out and climbed back up for altitude, Badger's voice came back and he was crying. Actually crying. Negative effect, you're hitting the trees. The bunkers are dug into the rock underneath the ridge. You're just pruning the leaves. We are dying down here. That hit me hard. We were up here, safe in the air, dropping ordnance that was doing absolutely nothing while boys my age were getting shredded. I looked at my fuel gauge. We had time, but we were out of heavy bombs. I had 1 500-pounder left on the centerline rack. Just one. And if I dropped it from standard altitude, it would just detonate in the canopy again. The fuses were set for contact. If they hit a thick branch, boom, airburst. Useless against a dug-in cave. Angel flight, return to base. We're Winchester on effective ordnance, Henderson ordered. He was right. By the book. We had tried. We failed. We were supposed to go home. But I looked down at that smoke. I thought about the letters those boys had in their pockets. I thought about their mothers. I thought about the absolute terror of being pinned in the mud, waiting for a mortar shell to land in your lap. I clicked my mic. Angel Leader, this is 2. I have 1 egg left. I'm going to make 1 more pass. -2. You're low on fuel and we aren't doing any good. Form up. I reached down and switched off my radio receiver. It was the first time in my military career I had directly disobeyed a flight order. I didn't do it out of rebellion. I did it because I had an idea, and I knew Henderson would talk me out of it. I tapped Miller on the shoulder through the canopy space. Hang on, I yelled, though he probably couldn't hear me over the engine. He looked pale. I didn't climb back to 4,000 feet. I stayed low, circling the valley. I needed to see under the trees. I dropped the nose, not in a steep vertical dive, but in a shallow, high-speed glide. I came in perpendicular to the ridge. The trees were rushing by in a blur of green and brown. I was at 500 feet, then 400. I could see the individual leaves. I could see the flashes of the Japanese machine guns now. They were firing out of a slit in the rock face, practically invisible from above, but clear as day from this angle. I was flying a dive bomber like a fighter, straight at the side of the mountain. The plan was insane. I had to skip the bomb. If I could put the bomb right into the mouth of the cave or right at the base of the rock, the delay fuse, if I had set it right, would let it penetrate before exploding. But to do that, I had to be lower. Lower than was safe. Lower than was sane. I lined up the nose. The SBD groaned under the stress. I was doing 250 knots. The ground fire started to shift toward me. I saw tracers whipping past my canopy, green streaks of light reaching out to swat me down. Miller was hammering away with the rear guns, the vibration shuddering through the airframe. Get some! Get some! I screamed, though only I could hear it. 300 feet, 200 feet. The ridge was looming up like a wall. My altimeter was useless this low. I was flying by feel and terror. I could see the Japanese soldiers in the emplacement. I saw them look up, their faces registering the shock of a plane coming at them at eye level. I waited. Every instinct in my body screamed to pull up. The collision warning light in my brain was flashing red. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I hit the release lever. The plane jumped as the 500-pound weight fell away. I didn't wait to see it drop. I yanked the stick back into my gut with both hands. The Dauntless groaned, a terrifying metal screeching sound, as the G-forces slammed me into the seat. My vision went gray at the edges. The tunnel vision of high G pullout. The trees at the top of the ridge whipped past my wheels. I swear I heard the landing gear scrape the foliage. I cleared the ridge by inches. Behind me, there was a momentary silence, and then a concussive thud that I felt more than heard. A massive plume of rock, dirt, and fire erupted from the side of the hill. I banked hard left, risking a stall to look back. The cave mouth was gone. The ridge had collapsed. I flipped my radio receiver back on. Static. Then Badger's voice. But this time, he wasn't crying. He was screaming in disbelief. Holy Mother of God! Direct hit! Target destroyed! Repeat, target destroyed! The firing has stopped! You crazy son of a bitch, you cleared the way! My hands were shaking so bad I could barely throttle back. I felt like I was going to vomit. The adrenaline dump was hitting me all at once. I looked back at Miller. He was slumped over his gun, and for a second, My heart stopped. I thought I'd killed him with the G-force or he'd taken a bullet. Then he gave a slow, shaky wave. He was just as terrified as I was. We limped back to base. When I landed, my knees were so weak I couldn't climb out of the cockpit. The ground crew had to help me down. I walked around the plane. There were branches, actual tree branches, stuck in the landing gear struts. Leaves mashed into the air intake. Bullet holes stitched across the tail. Henderson, my flight leader, stormed over to me. He looked like he was going to court-martial me right there on the tarmac. He looked at the branches in the gear. He looked at me. He took a deep breath, shook his head, and said, "Don't you ever turn your radio off on me again, Sullivan." Then he slapped me on the shoulder and walked away. He knew. He knew I'd saved them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my cot staring at the mosquito netting. I kept replaying the moment the ridge filled my windshield. I kept seeing the faces of those men in the cave right before I released the bomb. In war, you kill from a distance usually. You drop a bomb, you shoot at a shape. But when you fly that low, you see the humanity of the enemy. You see fear. And you realize that the difference between you being the hero and you being a smear of aluminum on a rock face is a fraction of a second. We flew more missions after that. Okinawa, the strikes on the home islands. But that day on Luzon changed me. It broke the illusion of immortality young men have. I realized I was just a mechanic of death, operating a machine, hoping the odds stayed in my favor. Years later, in the late 70s, I was at a hardware convention in Chicago. I was looking at some new power drills, minding my own business. An older guy, about my age, maybe a bit older, was staring at my name tag. He had a limp, walked with a cane. He came over and said, "Frank Sullivan? Were you a Navy pilot? Pacific?" I nodded. "That's right." He stared at me for a long time. His eyes started to water. He reached out and grabbed my hand with a grip like a vice. Luzon, January 45, the Horseshoe Valley. I felt a chill go down my spine. "I was there," I said softly. "I was in the mud," he said, his voice trembling. "We were done. We were writing our goodbyes. Then this crazy bastard comes out of nowhere, flying so low I thought he was crashing. Put a bomb right down their throat." He pulled me into a hug, right there in the middle of the convention center. He was crying into my shoulder. "I have 5 grandkids because of you, Frank. 5. We stood there for a while, 2 old men holding on to each other, surrounded by the noise of commerce and drills and saws. But all I could hear was that engine screaming and the wind over the wings. That was the moment I realized the weight of what I had done. It wasn't about the medal. I got a Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission, which sits in a box in the attic. It was about the timeline of existence. Because I flew too low, because I disobeyed orders, entire generations of people exist today who wouldn't have otherwise. That's a heavy thing to carry. It's a beautiful thing, but it's heavy. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I want to tell you about the fear, though. Real fear. Not the jump scare kind you get in movies. I'm talking about the slow-burning, acidic dread that eats your stomach lining. After Luzon, I developed a twitch in my left eye. Every time we had a briefing, every time I saw the chalkboard with the flight path, my eye would jump. Miller saw it. He never said anything. We had this silent pact. We were surviving, but the flying changed. We weren't the hunters anymore. We felt like prey. The Japanese were getting desperate. The kamikazes were starting. We'd see them diving into ships in the harbor, balls of fire consuming destroyers and carriers, and we had to fly through that flak, through that madness. One mission, about 3 weeks after the Valley incident, we were sent to hit a supply depot near Manila. The anti-aircraft fire was thick. They call it flak, and it looks like black puffs of smoke, harmless from a distance. But when you're close, it sounds like gravel being thrown against a tin roof. That's the shrapnel hitting your plane. We were in a dive, about 60 degrees down, and I felt the plane lurch. A 20mm shell had punched through the right wing, blowing a hole the size of a dinner plate. The plane wanted to roll over and die. I had to fight the stick with both hands, my boots stomping on the rudder pedals to keep her straight. "Miller! You okay back there?" I yelled. No answer. My heart hammered. "Miller!" "I'm here. Skipped," he shouted back, his voice sounding thin. "My intercom cord got yanked. I'm okay. Just get us home." We dropped the bomb, missed the target by 50 yards because the plane was flying like a brick, and leveled out. That flight back was the longest hour of my life. The hydraulic pressure was dropping. I had to pump the landing gear down manually. When we finally hit the deck, the right tire blew out, and we ground looped, spinning around in a cloud of dust and noise. I sat there in the cockpit, the engine ticking as it cooled, and I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. I was done. I wanted to quit. I wanted to go home to Brooklyn and eat a hot dog and never see a palm tree again. But you don't quit. You get up, you drink the terrible coffee, you sleep for 4 hours filled with nightmares, and you do it again. Because the guys on the ground can't quit. That's what kept us in the air. The infantry, the Marines. We saw what they went through. We saw them trudging through the mud, sleeping in foxholes filled with water, rotting from jungle rot. At least we had a bed to come back to usually. At least we had hot chow sometimes. We owed them everything. There was a specific kind of loneliness in the cockpit of a single-engine plane. Yes, you have a gunner, but he's facing backward. You're facing forward into the unknown. It's just you and the instrument panel. Altimeter, airspeed, turn, and bank oil pressure. Those dials are your gods. You pray they tell you the truth. And when you're over the ocean, miles from anywhere, looking at the vast blue emptiness, you realize how small you are. If the engine quits, you're just a speck of debris in an indifferent universe. I remember one patrol where we spotted a downed pilot in the water. He was bobbing in a yellow life raft, a tiny yellow dot in the blue. We circled him, tipping our wings to let him know we saw him. We radioed the location to a PBY Catalina rescue plane. We stayed overhead for as long as our fuel allowed, guarding him. Seeing that guy down there, alone, waiting, it terrified me more than the flak. The isolation. When the PBY finally landed and scooped him up, I felt a relief so profound I almost wept. We were brothers, all of us, even if we didn't know each other's names. As the war wound down, the missions got weird. We were hitting targets that didn't seem to matter as much. Bridges that led nowhere, empty trucks. It felt like we were just burning fuel and risking lives to run out the clock. But then you'd get a call like the one in Luzon, and you'd remember why you were there. I came home in late 1945. The transition was jarring. One day you're flying a warplane over a burning city. The next you're sitting on a train to New York, watching the American countryside roll by. No one shot at the train. No one was screaming on the radio. It was quiet. People were cheering, confetti, parades. But I felt like a ghost. I walked into my parents' house and my mother cried and held me. My father shook my hand, looking at the ribbons on my chest, but he didn't ask what they were for. They wanted the hero, Frank. They didn't want the Frank who had killed men. They didn't want the Frank who had scraped tree branches with his landing gear because he was desperate. So I buried him. I buried the pilot deep inside. I got a job. I met Sarah. We got married. I built a life. But the pilot was always there. He was there when I drove my car too fast on the highway, chasing a feeling I couldn't name. He was there when I watched the news and saw other wars, other young men making the same mistakes, fighting the same demons. He was there every time I looked at a ceiling fan. I'm telling you this now because I'm tired of carrying it alone, and because I want you to understand something about the men who fought that war. We weren't superheroes. We weren't the greatest generation because we were made of better stuff. We were just scared kids who did what had to be done because the alternative was unthinkable. We flew too low, not because we were brave, but because we loved the guys next to us more than we loved ourselves in that moment. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I want to talk about the moral cost. That's something the history books gloss over. They talk about strategic victories and tonnage dropped. They don't talk about the dreams. For years, I dreamed of that ridge. But in the nightmare, I don't pull up. In the nightmare, I slam into the rock. And sometimes, in the nightmare, the bomb doesn't go off. I fly over, I see the soldiers, and I fail. I wake up gasping. The guilt of survival is a real thing. Why did I make it? Why did Miller make it? We lost guys. Good guys. Tex disintegrated over Formosa. Ski went into the drink and never came up. Better pilots than me. Better men. But I'm the one here, 89 years old, telling a story into a microphone. There's a randomness to war that makes you question faith. I've wrestled with God for 70 years. I asked him why the flak hit the wing and not the cockpit. I asked him why the bomb released when the mechanism was jammed half the time. I never got an answer. The only answer I have is the face of that man in Chicago. The grandfather. He was the answer. If you are listening to this, and you've never served, I'm not asking for your pity. I'm asking for your awareness. When you see an old man sitting on a park bench staring at nothing, know that he might be seeing a jungle in 1945. He might be hearing a radio scream for help. Be patient with us. We are living in two worlds at once. And to the younger generation, the ones playing the video games and watching the movies, war isn't glory. It's dirt and oil and fear and the smell of your friend's blood. It's flying a metal can into a wall of fire and hoping you come out the other side. It's necessary sometimes, yes. Evil exists. We saw it. But don't ever think it's a game. I still have a piece of that SBD. When they scrapped the planes after the war, which broke my heart seeing them bulldozed into piles, I managed to keep the grip from my flight stick. It's black plastic worn smooth by my thumb. Sometimes, when the memories get too loud, I go to my study, open the drawer, and hold that grip. I close my eyes. I can feel the vibration. I can feel the resistance. I can hear Miller over the intercom. Target at 3 o'clock, Skipper. And for a moment, I'm 22 again. I'm scared, but I'm alive. I'm flying too low, but I'm exactly where I need to be. I hope this story means something to you. I hope it helps you understand the price that was paid for the world we live in. It's a flawed world, God knows, but it's ours, and we fought like hell to keep it. This is Frank Sullivan, signing off. Over and out. I said over and out, but the truth is, a man like me never really signs off. The memories don't have an off switch. You don't just hang up the headset and walk away from the Pacific. It follows you. It sits with you at the breakfast table. It rides in the passenger seat of your car. So, grab another cup of coffee. I'm not done. I realized after I stopped talking a moment ago that I told you about the climax, the big moment where I broke the rules and saved the day. But war isn't mostly those moments. War is mostly waiting. It's mostly boredom terrified by moments of sheer panic. And it's about the things you lose slowly, piece by piece, without even realizing they're gone until you get home and try to fit back into a world that doesn't make sense anymore. I want to take you back to before Luzon, back to when we first got to the carrier. I was assigned to a carrier air group. I won't say which carrier, out of respect for the families of the guys who didn't make it, but she was a big girl, an Essex class, a floating city of steel and oil. The first time you see a carrier from the launch looking up, it looks like a skyscraper knocked on its side. It's unnatural. And landing on it? That's not natural either. They tell you in flight school that aviation is about precision. Landing on a carrier is a controlled crash. You're coming in at 90 knots, the deck is pitching up and down 10, 15 feet in the swell, and you're aiming for a wire the thickness of your thumb. You have a tailhook, a metal claw, hanging off the back of your plane. If you miss the wire, you have a split second to slam the throttle forward and bolter, which means you take off again and go around. If you don't gas it fast enough, you end up in the barrier net, or worse, you go off the front end and the ship runs you over. I remember my first trap, that's what we called a landing, in the combat zone. I was shaking so bad my knees were knocking together. The LSO, landing signal officer, was out there on the platform with his paddles waving me in. He looked like a frantic bird. Cut! 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 I chopped the throttle. The SBD dropped like a stone. Bang! We hit the deck. The hook caught the number 3 wire. The harness dug into my shoulders so hard I thought I dislocated a collarbone. The plane jerked to a stop. I sat there, hyperventilating, the smell of burnt rubber and exhaust filling the cockpit. A deckhand in a blue jersey jumped up on the wing and signaled me to fold the wings and taxi forward. I had made it. I was a carrier pilot, but I saw a guy 2 days later who didn't make it. His name was Jenkins. Good kid. From Ohio, he came in too high. The LSO waved him off, but Jenkins was fixated on the deck. Target fixation. It kills more pilots than the Japanese ever did. He cut the engine too late. He bounced. The SBD is a sturdy plane, but it's not made to bounce 20 feet in the air. He slewed sideways, missed the barrier, and went right into the island, the control tower structure. The explosion was immediate, a fireball rolling across the deck. I was standing in the catwalk, watching. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched the fire crews in their asbestos suits run into the fire. That's bravery. Running into a burning plane loaded with fuel and ammo to pull a kid out. They didn't get him. They got his gunner out, but Jenkins, well, there wasn't much left to bury. That night, in the ready room, nobody sat in his chair. We played poker and we smoked cigarettes and we talked about girls, but nobody looked at that empty chair. That was the rule. You don't look at the empty chair, or you acknowledge that it could be you tomorrow. The Pacific Theater was vast. People don't understand the scale. You look at a map and you see islands, but when you're flying over it, it's just blue. Endless, indifferent blue. If you go down, the ocean swallows you and doesn't leave a mark. There's a psychological weight to that water. It felt like it was waiting for us. Miller, my gunner, he hated the water. He couldn't swim well. He grew up in the city, never saw the ocean until boot camp. He used to keep a picture of his girl, Mary Alice, taped to the back of my armor plate. He'd tap it before every takeoff. "Get me home to her, Frank," he'd say. "Just get me home to her." That's a hell of a burden to put on a 20-year-old pilot. But I took it. I told him, "I'll get you home, Miller, I promise." We broke promises in that war. We had to. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Let's talk about the SBD Dauntless itself. I mentioned she was slow but deadly. She was an outdated bird by 44, but she was honest. That's the best word for her. The controls were heavy. No hydraulics assisting the stick. You had to muscle her around. When you entered a dive, you were fighting the air itself. The dive flaps, these Swiss cheese-looking metal plates, would deploy, and the whole airframe would buffet. It was like riding a jackhammer. But the beauty of the Dauntless was her stability. Once you put the nose on the target, she stayed there. The wind didn't push her around like the lighter fighters. You could track a moving ship from 8,000 feet, roll in, and keep the crosshairs glued to the smokestack all the way down to release point. My first real combat dive was against a transport ship near Truk Lagoon. Intelligence said it was carrying munitions. We came in high, 12,000 feet. The sun was behind us. Standard tactics, blind the gunners. Angel flight, attack run. 1 minute, Henderson called. My stomach did that flip-flop thing it always did. I checked my mixture. Rich. Prop pitch. Forward. Flaps. Closed until the push. Rolling in! I kicked the rudder and pushed the stick forward. The horizon disappeared and was replaced by the blue water and the tiny gray toy ship down below. I pulled the dive brake lever. The plane shuddered and slowed. We were doing about 240 knots straight down. The altimeter unwound like a clock on fast forward. 10,000, 8,000, 6,000. At about 4,000 feet, the ship started to sparkle. It looked like someone was snapping flash photos on the deck. That was the anti-aircraft fire. Tracers started floating up toward us. From a distance, they looked slow, almost lazy. Then they zip past your canopy at supersonic speeds. Zip, zip, zip. You don't hear them, you just see them. I adjusted my aim. The ship was getting bigger. I could see the wake. I could see the cargo booms. "Steady, Frank, steady," I whispered. 2,000 feet, release. I punched the button on the stick. The bomb crutch swung out and released the 1,000-pounder. I hauled back on the stick. The G-forces crushed me into the seat. My vision narrowed. I grunted, forcing air into my lungs to keep from passing out. The anti-G straining maneuver, we call it now. But back then it was just grunt and pray. I leveled out at about 500 feet, screaming across the water. I looked back. A geyser of water erupted off the starboard side of the ship. A near miss. I cursed. "Damn it! Close enough, skipper," Miller yelled. "Look!" The shock wave had caved in the hull plates. We watched as the ship started to list. We hadn't blown it to smithereens, but we had heard it. And then, the secondary explosion started. The intelligence was right. It was an ammo ship. A massive bloom of orange fire tore through the midsection. The ship broke in half like a dry twig. I should have felt triumphant. That was the enemy. That was ammunition that wouldn't kill Marines on the beaches. But as we circled, gaining altitude, I saw men jumping into the water. Tiny dots. And I remembered the pilot we had saved weeks before. The ocean didn't care which uniform you wore. It would drown a Japanese sailor just as fast as an American one. I felt a sickness in my gut. I killed those men. I didn't see their faces, but I stopped their hearts. You rationalize it. You say, it's them or us. And that's true. It is them or us. But it still takes a piece of your soul. We got back to the carrier, and the debriefing was clinical. Good hit, Sullivan. Effective target destruction. Then you go to the mess hall and eat powdered eggs and pretend you didn't just watch 100 men burn. That's the compartmentalization. You build boxes in your mind. This box is for flying. This box is for killing. This box is for mom and dad. This box is for Sarah. And you never ever let the boxes touch. Because if the killing box touches the Sarah box, you go crazy. We had a chaplain on board, Father O'Malley, a good man. He drank whiskey like water, but he listened. I went to him once late at night. The ship was quiet, just the hum of the ventilation. I said, "Father, I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a murderer." He looked at me with these sad, bloodshot eyes. He poured me a drink in a paper cup. "Frank," he said, "sin requires malice. You don't have malice, you have duty. There's a difference. God knows the difference. You aren't killing because you hate. You're killing because you want the hate to stop." It sounded good. It sounded philosophical. But at 2 a.m., when you're staring at the bunk above you, duty feels a lot like sin anyway. Then came the Philippines campaign. That was a different beast. The Japanese were desperate. We weren't fighting for islands in the middle of nowhere anymore. We were taking back territory they had held for years. The civilians were there. That complicated everything. You couldn't just bomb anything that moved. You had to be sure. We were supporting the landings at Leyte. The sky was thick with planes. Ours, theirs. It was a furball. I remember looking up and seeing contrails weaving patterns like a giant spiderweb. We were on a patrol, looking for artillery positions, when Miller screamed, "Zero! 6 o'clock! Hi!" The SBD isn't a dogfighter. If a Zero gets on your tail, you're usually dead. They're faster, more agile, and they have 20mm cannons. I did the only thing I could do. I turned into the attack. It's counterintuitive. Your brain screams to run away. But if you run, you present a steady target. If you turn into him, you increase the angle of deflection. He has to pull a tighter turn to get a bead on you. I banked hard left, pulling the stick into my lap. The Zero overshot, zooming past us in a blur of white paint and red meatball insignia. "Get him, Miller, get him!" I yelled. Miller opened up with the twin 30s. Dak, 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 dak. I could smell the cordite from his guns drifting forward into my cockpit. The tracers reached out and stitched the Zero's wing. Smoke started to trail. But the Japanese pilot was good. He pulled a vertical loop, an Immelmann turn, and came right back down at us. "He's coming back!" Miller shouted. I didn't have the energy to climb and meet him. I was low and slow. I was a sitting duck. I dropped the nose, heading for the tree line. My plan was to fly so low that he couldn't dive on me without hitting the ground. It was a game of chicken. I was skimming the palm trees again. Seems to be a habit of mine. The Zero came down, firing. I heard the thump-thump of bullets hitting my tail section. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Miller screamed. My heart stopped. "Miller, talk to me! My leg! I took one in the leg!" I was frantic. I couldn't help him. I had to fly. I jagged left, then right, using the rudder to skid the plane. The Zero pilot realized he was too low. He couldn't pull out of his dive if he committed any further. He broke off, climbing away to find easier prey. "I'm getting us home, Miller. Hang on, buddy, hang on." I pushed the throttle through the gate. We redlined the engine all the way back to the fleet. I didn't care about fuel. I didn't care about the engine temperature. Miller was groaning in the back. I kept talking to him. "Think about Mary Alice, Miller. Think about the Dodgers. Think about a cold beer at Ebbets Field. Frank," he whispered, "it burns." "I know, kid. I know. We're almost there. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When I caught the wire on the carrier, I didn't wait for the taxi signal. I shut the engine down right there on the wires. The deck crews came running, mad as hell that I was fouling the deck, until they saw the blood running out of the gunner's compartment. It was streaking down the side of the white fuselage like red paint. They pulled Miller out. His flight suit was soaked. He had taken a 7mm round through the thigh. It missed the artery by an inch, the doc told me later. If it had hit the femoral, he would have bled out in 2 minutes. I stood on the deck, watching them carry him to the sickbay. I was covered in sweat, shaking. I looked at my plane. The tail looked like Swiss cheese. The rudder cable was hanging by a thread. If that cable had snapped, we would have spun in. That night, I went to the infirmary. Miller was sedated, pale as a sheet. I sat by his bed for 3 hours. I watched his chest rise and fall. I realized then that I loved that kid. Not like a romance, but something deeper. Something you can't explain to a civilian. When you trust a man to watch your back while you fly into hell, he becomes part of you. He was out of the war. The wound was bad enough to send him home. The $1 million wound, we called it. You get hurt enough to go home, but not enough to be crippled for life. I should have been happy for him. He was going to live. He was going to see Mary Alice. But I felt abandoned. Selfish, I know. But I felt like he was leaving me alone in the fire. They assigned me a new gunner. A guy named Kowalski. He was older, cynical. A transfer from another squadron. He was a good gunner, technically. But we didn't have the rhythm. We didn't have the telepathy. It was just a job for him. The war ground on. 1945 turned into a blur of islands. Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The kamikazes became the main threat. It's hard to describe the horror of the kamikaze. It's not warfare, it's fanaticism weaponized. You'd see them coming, weaving through the flak, planes burning, wings shot off, and they kept coming. They wanted to die. How do you fight an enemy who wants to die? It terrified us. It made us question everything. We were fighting to live. They were fighting to die. It felt like we were fighting a death cult. We flew combat air patrol, KP, mostly during Okinawa, trying to intercept them before they got to the ships. The SBD wasn't a fighter, but we were up there, plugging gaps in the radar coverage. I saw a kamikaze hit the USS Bunker Hill. It was like watching a volcano erupt, a column of black smoke rising 30,000 feet into the air, thousands of men burning, and you're up there, circling, helpless. You feel guilty for being safe in the air while the sailors are burning in the oil below. That guilt, it accumulates. It's like radiation. You don't feel it at first, but it builds up in your bones. By mid-1945, I was exhausted. Not just tired, soul tired. I stopped writing letters home. What was there to say? Dear Mom, today I watched a ship explode. Today I almost died again. Hope the garden is nice. You can't bridge that gap, so you go silent. The silence is dangerous. That's when the darkness creeps in. I started taking risks, unnecessary risks, flying lower than I needed to, holding the dive a second longer. I think part of me wanted to see if God was paying attention. Or maybe I just wanted it to be over, one way or another. That brings me back to the Luzon Valley, the story I started with. By the time that mission happened, I was already fraying at the edges. Disobeying that order to return to base wasn't just about saving the infantry, it was about taking control. For once, I was going to decide who lived and who died. Not the brass, not the Japanese, not chance, me. But there's a flip side to that control. When you take the life of another human being into your hands, you own it. Forever. I own the lives of those Japanese soldiers in that cave. I own the lives of the Americans I saved. It's a ledger I keep in my head. I want to tell you about the smells. You never forget the smells. The Pacific has a rot to it. Jungle rot. Dead vegetation. Wet earth. Mixed with high-octane aviation fuel and cordite. It's a sweet, sickly smell. Sometimes, when I walk past a construction site and smell diesel, or when I'm in a garden center and smell wet mulch, I'm back there. My heart rate spikes. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And the sounds, the radio chatter, it's a language of its own. Tally-ho! Bandits. Angels 10. Splash 1. Short, clipped phrases designed to convey life and death information in seconds. But behind the jargon, you can hear the fear. You can hear the strain in a man's voice when he says, "I've got a hung bomb," or "I'm losing oil pressure." You learn to listen to the tone, not just the words. I remember one pilot, a guy named Larson. He got hit over Rabaul, his engine seized. He was too low to bail out. He came over the radio, "Calm as you please. Angel Leader, this is 4. My engine is gone. I'm going in. Tell my wife I love her." No screaming, no panic, just acceptance. And then, static. That silence. That static is the loudest noise in the world. It's the sound of a life ending. I carried that static with me for 40 years. I drank too much in the 50s and 60s. A lot of us did. We were trying to drown the static. We didn't have PTSD back then. We had combat fatigue or shell shock. And the cure was to man up and get back to work. So we worked. We built the highways, the suburbs, the corporations. We were the engine of the American century. But inside, a lot of us were still circling over the Pacific, waiting for the fuel to run out. It wasn't until I met that guy in Chicago, the one I told you about, that the static started to clear. Validation. Knowing that the suffering wasn't for nothing. That's what we all want, isn't it? To know that our pain meant something. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. There's another story I need to tell. It's about a dog. Yeah, a dog. We had a mascot on the base in the Philippines, a scruffy mutt, looked like a terrier mix. We called him Flack. That dog had more flight time than some pilots. He'd sleep under the wings of the planes. He'd wait on the strip when we took off and be there when we landed. He was bad luck to some, good luck to others. One day, the Japanese shelled the airfield. Mortars started walking down the runway. We were scrambling to get into the foxholes. I saw Flack running in circles, confused by the noise. A mortar hit near the fuel dump, shrapnel everywhere. I didn't think, I just ran out, grabbed the dog, and dove into a trench. I covered him with my body. He was shaking, peeing on my flight suit. We lay there for 20 minutes while the world exploded around us. Why did I risk my life for a dog? It seems stupid now. But in that moment, Flack was the only innocent thing in the whole damn war. He didn't hate anyone. He didn't have an ideology. He just wanted a belly rub. Saving him felt like saving a piece of humanity. He survived the war. One of the mechanics smuggled him back to the States. I heard he lived to be 15, fat and happy on a farm in Iowa. I like to think about that. Amidst all the carnage, Flack made it. I'm getting tired now. Talking about this takes a lot out of me. The voice gets raspy, the hands start to shake a little more, but we have to keep going. There's more to say. There's the story of the typhoon. You think the Japanese were scary? Try riding out a typhoon in a tin can on the ocean. Nature is the ultimate enemy. It doesn't care if you're American or Japanese, it just wants to crush you. We lost 3 destroyers in that storm. 3 ships just gone, rolled over by waves that looked like mountains. I was strapped into my bunk on the carrier, listening to the ship groan. I thought the hull was going to snap. You realize then that all your technology, all your guns, all your bravado, it's nothing against the wind. It makes you humble. I think that's what war taught me most. Humility. You are not the main character of the universe. You are a leaf in a hurricane. And if you survive, it's not because you're special. It's because the wind blew the other way. I'll take a break here, but don't go far. I have to tell you about the occupation, about walking through the ruins of Nagasaki, about seeing the face of the enemy when the guns were finally silent. That's a whole different kind of ghost story. You asked about the typhoon. They called it Typhoon Cobra. It hit the 3rd Fleet in December of '44. You have to understand we had just been fighting the Japanese Navy, the Imperial Army, and the kamikazes. We thought we had seen every way a man could die. But the ocean showed us we were wrong. The sky turned a color I've never seen since, a bruised purple like a hematoma. The barometer dropped so fast, the needles on the bridge were practically spinning. I was in the ready room when the order came down. Secure for heavy weather. That's Navy speak for tie down everything you own, pray to whatever God you believe in, and hold on. The waves weren't waves anymore. They were moving mountains of water, 60, maybe 70 feet high. The carrier, this massive steel city, was being tossed around like a cork in a bathtub. We were listing 20 degrees, then 25. I saw a parked Corsair on the flight deck break its chains. It slid across the deck, smashed into the catwalk, and tumbled into the sea. Just gone. $1 million of war machine, swallowed in a second. And the sound. The wind wasn't howling. It was screaming. It sounded like a freight train was driving through the hangar deck. I spent 18 hours strapped into my bunk. You couldn't stand up. If you tried, you'd be thrown against a bulkhead. I remember looking at the rivets on the ceiling, watching the steel flex. I thought the ship was going to break her back. I thought about drowning in the dark, trapped in a steel box, sinking to the bottom of the Pacific. That fear is different from combat. In combat, you can fight back. You can shoot, you can fly, you can maneuver. In a typhoon, you are powerless, you are insignificant. It strips away your ego. You realize that nature doesn't care about your war. It doesn't care about democracy or fascism. It just is. When the storm finally broke, the fleet was scattered. 3 destroyers, the Spence, the Hull, and the Monaghan, had capsized and sunk. Nearly 800 men died, not by enemy fire, by the wind and the water. We spent days searching for survivors. I flew search patterns until my eyes burned. We found empty life rafts. We found oil slicks. We found debris, but very few men. It felt unfair. To survive the zeros and the flak, only to be drowned by a storm? It felt like a cosmic joke. It made me angry. It made me question the order of things. But the war didn't stop for our grief. We regrouped, refueled, and turned back toward Japan. The grind continued into 1945. The targets got closer to the mainland. We started seeing the home islands. The flak got thicker. The desperation got palpable. Then came August. We were prepping for the invasion. Operation Downfall. The briefing officers were telling us to expect 1 million casualties. 1 million! They told us the Japanese civilians were being trained to fight with bamboo spears. They told us every inch of ground would be a bloodbath. I looked around the ready room at the faces of my friends, kids really, age 20, 21, and I knew half of us wouldn't be coming home if the invasion happened. I had made peace with it. I had written my just-in-case letter to my parents. I had it tucked in my flight log. Then the rumors started. Weird rumors. Someone said a single bomb had wiped out a whole city. We laughed. Impossible, we said. That's propaganda. But the rumors persisted. Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. On August 15th, the announcement came over the ship's tannoy system. All hands here there. The Japanese imperial government has accepted the terms of surrender. The war is over. Repeat, the war is over. I didn't cheer. In the movies, everyone throws their hats in the air and kisses the nurse. On the carrier, there was a stunned silence. We looked at each other, bewildered. It was over? Just like that? No invasion? No 1 million casualties? It felt anticlimactic. It felt impossible. Then slowly, the noise started. A shout here, a laugh there, then the whistle blew, and the ship went crazy. But I sat down on a tool chest in the hangar deck and put my head in my hands. I just sat there. I felt drained, empty. The adrenaline that had sustained me for 2 years just evaporated, leaving me shaking. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. A few weeks later, we were anchored off the coast. I got a chance to go ashore. I was part of a small group sent to assess the airfields near Nagasaki. I wanted to see it. I needed to see what had ended the war. We took a jeep inland. The countryside was beautiful. Green hills, terraced rice paddies, mist clinging to the valleys. It looked peaceful. It looked like the postcards my grandmother used to collect. But as we got closer to the city, the green turned to gray, then to black. I have never in all my life seen anything like Nagasaki. It wasn't just destroyed, it was erased. Tokyo had been firebombed, sure, and that was horrific. But this was different. There was no rubble pile. It was just flat. Dust. Ash. Twisted steel skeletons of buildings standing like tombstones. We got out of the jeep and walked. The silence was heavy. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our boots on the debris. I saw the shadow of a bridge railing burned into the pavement. The flash had been so bright it bleached the concrete, leaving a permanent shadow. I saw melted glass bottles fused together. I saw a bicycle, twisted and fused into a lump of metal. And the smell. It wasn't the rot of the jungle. It was a dry, chemical smell. The smell of pulverized stone and death. I wandered away from the group. I shouldn't have, but I needed to be alone with it. I found myself in what used to be a residential neighborhood. The houses were gone, just tile foundations left. I saw a woman sifting through the ash. She was small, wearing a tattered kimono, her face wrapped in a cloth. She looked up at me. I froze. I was wearing my flight suit, my .45 pistol on my hip. I was the conqueror. I was the enemy. I expected her to scream, to run, to attack me. She didn't. She just looked at me. Her eyes were hollow, dead. There was no hate in them, just an infinite exhaustion. She held up something she had found in the ash. It was a small ceramic bowl, cracked but intact. A tea bowl. She wiped the ash off it with her thumb, looked at it, and then looked at me again. She held it out. I didn't know what to do. My hand moved automatically to my pocket. I had a bar of chocolate, a Hershey's tropical bar, the kind that didn't melt but tasted like sawdust. I pulled it out and held it toward her. We stood there for a moment, trading tragedy for chocolate. She took the bar. I didn't take the bowl. I couldn't. I felt like an intruder in a graveyard. I nodded to her, a small, jerky motion. She bowed very slightly. That moment broke me more than the combat. In the air, the enemy is a machine, a Zero, a Betty bomber, a ship. Down here, the enemy was a grandmother who had lost her home, her family, her world. And we had done it. We had to do it. I truly believe that. If we hadn't dropped the bomb, the invasion would have killed millions more, Japanese and American. But knowing it was necessary doesn't make it feel good. It doesn't wash the ash off your soul. I walked back to the jeep. I didn't tell the other guys about the woman. I kept that to myself. It was my private penance. We shipped home in late '45. The troop transport was crowded, smelly, and loud, but nobody cared. We were going to the Golden Gate. We were going to steak and eggs and milk that wasn't powdered. We played poker for endless hours, betting with invasion money that was now useless. We talked about what we were going to do. "I'm going to buy a Ford," one guy said. "I'm going to sleep for a week," said another. "I'm going to kiss the first girl I see," said a third. I didn't say much. I didn't know what I was going to do. The idea of normal seemed alien. How do you go from dodging flak at 12,000 feet to selling paint? How do you worry about a mortgage when you've seen cities turn to dust? When we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge, it was foggy. The foghorns were blowing. Then the mist cleared, and there it was. San Francisco. The hills, the buildings, the cars driving on the bridge. A fireboat was spraying water plumes in the air. People were lined up on the docks, waving flags. I cried. I'm not ashamed to say it. I stood at the rail and wept. Not tears of joy, exactly. Tears of release. It was finally over. The survival instinct that had been wound tight as a clock spring inside my chest finally snapped. I let go. My parents met me at Grand Central Station in New York. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Grayer. My father looked older. They hugged me, and my mother smelled like lavender and starch. The smell of home. But I felt stiff. I felt like I was made of wood. I hugged them back, but I felt like I was acting a part. The returning hero. The first few months were the hardest. I'd be walking down the street in Brooklyn, and a car would backfire. I'd be on the pavement before I knew what happened, covering my head. People would stare. I'd get up, brush off my suit, and walk away, burning with shame. I couldn't sleep in a bed. It was too soft. I slept on the floor for a month. I missed the noise of the ship. The silence of the bedroom was deafening. I'd lie there and listen to my own heartbeat, waiting for the alarm to sound. I got a job at a hardware store. Sullivan & Sons, my father's place. I learned to cut keys, mix paint, thread pipes. It was good, honest work. It occupied my hands, but my mind would drift. I'd be explaining the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screw to a customer, and suddenly I'd be back in the cockpit, watching tracers zip past. Frank, you okay?" the customer would ask. "Yeah," I'd say, blinking. "Sorry, daydreaming." I met Sarah a year later. She was a nurse. She had seen the guys coming back in pieces, so she understood the look in my eyes. She didn't push. She didn't ask for war stories. She just held my hand when the nightmares came. She saved me, in a way. She anchored me back to the world of the living. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. But I never told her about the ridge in Luzon. I never told her about the woman in Nagasaki. Those were mine. There was a reunion in 1955. The squadron got together in St. Louis, 10 years later. We were all a bit heavier, a bit thinner on top. Henderson was there. He was bald as a cue ball. We drank beer and slapped backs. We laughed about the bad food and the crazy landings. But as the night went on, the laughter died down. We ended up sitting in a corner of the hotel bar, just the guys who had flown the missions. "You ever think about it?" Henderson asked, staring into his drink. "Every day," I said. "Me too," he said. "I miss it. God help me, I miss it. I miss the clarity. You knew who the bad guys were. You knew what you had to do. Life out here, it's complicated. Gray areas." He was right. War is terrible, but it's simple. Peace is beautiful, but it's complex. In war, your purpose is survival and victory. In peace, you have to invent your own purpose. That's the struggle. I watched my kids grow up during the Cold War. I watched them do duck and cover drills under their desks. It made me sick. We had fought to end the fear, and here it was, just wearing a different uniform. I wanted to tell them, a desk won't save you from a bomb, but I stayed quiet. You don't take away a child's hope. I want to talk about the matrix you mentioned in the beginning, the system. I'm an old man, and I don't know much about internet terms, but I know about systems. The military is a system. Society is a system. They tell you what to value. They tell you who to hate. They tell you what success looks like. In 1944, the system told me that my value was measured in tonnage sunk and targets destroyed. It told me that the Japanese were monsters. It told me that fear was weakness. But when you're alone in a cockpit at 15,000 feet, or when you're looking into the eyes of a woman in the ruins of a city, the system dissolves. You realize it's all a construct, a story we tell ourselves to justify the horror. The truth is much simpler and much more terrifying. We are all just people. Scared, fragile, temporary people. The Japanese pilot I shot down, he probably loved his mother. He probably liked baseball. He probably didn't want to die. But the system put him in that Zero and me in that Dauntless and said, kill or be killed. So, if you're listening to this and you feel like you're trapped in a system that doesn't care about you, you probably are. But you have a choice. You can let the system define you, or you can find your own humanity within it. You can fly the mission, but you can also choose to see the enemy as a human being. You can do your job, but you don't have to sell your soul to it. I think about that bomb I dropped in the valley, the one I disobeyed orders to drop. That was me breaking the system. The system said, return to base. My humanity said, save those men. It was the most dangerous thing I ever did, but it was the most human thing I ever did. Regrets? I have a few. I regret the men I couldn't save. I regret the letters I didn't write. I regret the time I spent being angry at the world for what it showed me. But I don't regret the service. I don't regret the brotherhood. There is a love that exists between soldiers that civilians will never understand. It's a love born of shared trauma and absolute reliance. I would have died for Miller. He would have died for me. That kind of bond is rare. You don't find it in the hardware business. As I get closer to the end of my own runway, the memories are actually getting clearer. They say that happens. Short-term memory goes, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can remember the serial number of my plane, Buno 36422, and the sound of Miller's voice perfectly. I'm telling this story now because the witnesses are dying. Every day we lose another few hundred WWII vets. Soon we'll all be gone, and then it will just be history. It will be pages in a book, pixels on a screen. But it wasn't history to us. It was our lives. It was the heat and the blood and the fear. I don't want you to think of me as a hero. Please! I was just a man who did a job. The heroes are the ones who never came back. The heroes are the ones lying in the Punch Bowl Cemetery in Honolulu, or under the white crosses in Normandy, or in the deep dark of the Philippine Sea. They gave up 50, 60, 70 years of life. They gave up the chance to be a grandfather. They gave up everything. I got to live. I got to see my grandkids graduate. I got to hold my wife's hand when she passed. I got the bonus rounds, and I've tried to use them well. I've tried to be kind. I've tried to be honest. I look at the world today, and I see a lot of anger. I see people fighting over things that don't matter. I see people taking their freedom for granted, and I want to shake them. I want to say, do you know what this cost? Do you have any idea the price of the air you breathe? But I don't. I just sit on my porch, drink my coffee, and watch the birds. I want to leave you with one final image. It's from a training flight back in the States before we shipped out. We were flying over the Grand Canyon. Just a joyride, really. I was in formation with 3 other planes. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in reds and purples and golds. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The air was smooth as glass. For a moment, the war didn't exist. The fear didn't exist. It was just flight. Pure, unadulterated flight. I looked over at my wingman, a kid named Baker. He looked at me and grinned, his teeth white against his oxygen mask. He gave me a thumbs up. Baker died 2 months later at Tarawa. But in that moment, over the canyon, we were infinite. We were young gods. Hold on to those moments. The moments of beauty. The moments of connection. Because when the flak starts flying, and the engine quits and the darkness comes, those are the things that will carry you home. This is Frank Sullivan, 2nd Infantry Support, Carrier Air Group 11, pilot of SBD Dauntless, the Ruptured Duck. Signing off. Thank you for listening.